Hello, and welcome to this episode of Realizing Revenues. I'm Victoria Lubnick, Vice President of Business Development at Wealth Access. The purpose of these episodes is to talk with industry leaders about real-life challenges and to understand how technology can help meet the demands of modern customers and ultimately to realize revenues. Today, I'm joined by David Lincoln, co-founder of Wise. David, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
And can you just share a little bit about yourself and Wise?
Sure, happy to do so. So thank you. And again, for those that I don't know who are listening, appreciate your time. Wise is a Washington, D.C. based research firm that focuses exclusively on wealth management. And so for those of you that don't know, I've been spending my whole career doing research, consulting, advice of various sorts for financial services firms. I have spent most of my time in asset management, and of that portion, again, a lot of time focused on the wealth management business. And so I worked for a number of firms, corporate executive board. I managed the private banking practice, VIP forum, then family office exchange, where I worked with single family offices and MFOs. And then eventually started this company. Wise was set up at the outset to provide more data to wealth management firms. And so there's a lot of great stuff out there. However, a few years back, we felt like there was not enough really good empirical research on the wealth management business. And so that was kind of the genesis for Wise. And then, many years later, here on the podcast with you, Victoria.
I know, it's fun. We've come full circle, right? Been in the same wealth circles for years and come across each other at the same client. So our services were complementary then, and they're complementary now too that I'm at Wealth Access. So it's fun.
Yeah, it's good to finally work together.
Yeah. Well, and as we both know, so the pandemic and economic environment has created challenges for financial institutions. So offices and branches have closed, so no in-person meetings have been able to take place. Meetings have moved to Zoom. And so that's all emphasized for what we found from clients to better leverage technology to connect and engage with clients. And so at Wealth Access, what we've seen from financial institutions is investing better in technology to provide and deliver an easier, more streamlined customer experience. So providing, for example, one spot for a customer to log in, to be able to see their entire relationship across a financial institution, but then also to pull in their held away assets. So providing an easy to access view via computer, tablet, or their phone, where they can have that complete financial picture. So trying to better deliver a more seamless customer experience, and then kind of flipping that, what we found is the advantage is that the advisors and bankers then have access to that information to be able to better advise their clients for product and service needs, helping them to grow their business, for example, and helping to just be more of a trusted advisor. So that's a way that we've seen firms trying to respond to the challenges of what's happened because of the pandemic. So I'm curious to know what you've seen as the biggest challenges from your clients in terms of responding to the pandemic and the economic changes.
It's funny, maybe I could respond to it differently because obviously the pandemic was a really difficult time for everybody, right? It was very disruptive, lots of adverse consequences and so forth. However, I do feel like, kind of ironically, perhaps for some of our members, it was a real chance for them to highlight their value proposition and to reinforce some of their really good interpersonal connections and relationships with their own clients. And so again, don't want to minimize, it was a really kind of a horrible thing for everybody to live through. However, in the interest of kind of an interesting kind of take on the last couple of years, what we saw was firms really kind of going back to fundamentals, doing a lot of outreach to clients, reminding them that this is why they have a financial advisor. It is for periods of uncertainty where you really don't know what's going to happen. This is why we have financial plans. This is why we have kind of made all these preparations in the first place. It's for moments like this. And so I thought that was one of the kind of interesting, again, not challenges, but one of the silver linings, if you will, that came out of all this. And so Just interestingly, as I mentioned at the outset, part of our focus is on data. I can't prove this, but one of the things we saw in some of the metrics that we've been tracking for our clients over the last few years is an uptick in retention rates. And so one of the hypotheses we have is that during the pandemic, again, with all this outreach, a lot of extra focus on interpersonal communication, calling campaigns, all that kind of good stuff, that perhaps it might have kind of helped solidify relationships. And so certainly kind of an interesting possibility, if nothing else.
What have you found, and because I agree with the retention, what we're hearing from clients is that there's less emphasis on trying to attract new business, if you will. That's always an appeal, but it's also trying to capture more of what's within your own four walls and trying to have a better view of your clients, and then trying to drive deeper engagement with those clients or expand those relationships. And what have you found have been some of the key drivers for some of your members in terms of retention? What have you found that they're offering?
In terms of retention?
Best practices.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of retention, I think the things that I kind of mentioned are front and center. It's just making sure that from an engagement perspective that there's a lot of outreach. Also, as you kind of think about sort of the mobilization effort during the depths of the pandemic to really get a whole bunch of people to change their behavior, drop everything and call every single person they work with, is there's been kind of a desire, at least from some firms, to try to maintain that momentum, right? If you have suddenly kind of affected large-scale behavioral change for the better, right? For the strengthening relationships, reinforcing value proposition, expanding relationships and so forth, then why not kind of, keep that momentum going? And so that's number one, that affects both sales, expansion of relationship, it affects retention, and it drives satisfaction. So all good things. Now on the retention piece specifically that you asked about, we have seen people focus a little bit more in that area. I feel like sometimes, Victoria, we always think in terms of sales. How can we drive new business? Well, of course, the trust business is set up to distribute assets. Sometimes I feel like even though we all know that's true, retention is a little bit overlooked as a lever for helping with growth. And so we have seen more recently firms kind of take a closer look at retention. There's a bunch of interesting tactics out there. One of the things that kind of comes to mind is we've heard of firms developing kind of risk profiles. So what is the risk that Victoria might leave the relationship either in part or in full, right? So perhaps like she's been consolidating accounts or consolidating assets, that's a sign. Perhaps there's atypical withdrawals. That's a sign. There are other characteristics that might impact the probability of departure. For example, if your relationship manager recently left, that's a huge risk factor for attrition events. And so you can kind of create a mental map almost of how you might sort of score somebody in your book of business, your clients, formally or informally, about their likelihood to leave. And so lots of interesting stuff going on. Again, though, I think the two big points, communication and really strengthening relationships, kind of came out of the pandemic. And then number two, more of a deliberate focus on retention and trying to get in front of attrition risks.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned too the risks and some of the predictive analytics, if you will, for identifying those customer segments who might be at risk for partial or the full relationship leaving. And that's something that we've put more development into at Wealth Access, because it's all about the data. Going back to your initial comment, so having all this data, but then being able to identify those opportunities and use the data to then help drive those actionable opportunities and to be able to better understand where your customers might be at risk or using that information to your advantage, to your point.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, great. So in terms of what are you seeing from firms to improve return on assets? Because as we all know too, I mean, it's always about revenue and the bottom line, and that helps fund a lot of the other initiatives and projects that they need to help source for the financial institution. So what are you seeing in terms of best practices in terms of pricing and helping to improve return on assets?
And maybe it's not necessary, but perhaps I can first, before we get to the how, is hit the why.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Why would this be a priority? Why is this a goal? This is obviously something that we've been promoting or advocating for a while. I think just in general, what I would say for those listening is to keep in mind just two real big trends, both of which are very well known. Number one is on the expense side, is that there's been this competition for really good quality talent. So there's competition for labor. We have seen in our data that's driving up, or at least we believe it's driving up, some of the compensation expenses at a pretty steady clip year on year. And so in your mind, again, kind of hold the idea that compensation expenses are creeping upwards. We think it's fundamentally about a mismatch between supply and demand for really good people. On the revenue side, this is easier to get out. Obviously, 2021 was one of the best years ever for a lot of the firms that we serve. It'd be nice if they were all like 2021. Unfortunately, 2022 is certainly not going to work out nearly as well. We're kind of losing the sort of tailwind from the market. Market returns are obviously going to be a lot worse this year, so we're losing this revenue dividend. You kind of put those things together, you've got steadily rising compensation expenses, you've got pressure on the top line, and what you find is that if you were to do nothing at all for this year, or to do nothing at all next year preemptively, what you'd expect is margins to come down. And so there's a real pressure to kind of replace, if you will, some of that lost dividend from the markets. Now, obviously, you can go out and hire really talented salespeople. I'm sure everybody is really focused on doing that. However, again, that's a strategy that's fairly expensive. And so one of the things that we're really focused on here at Wise is the other things that you could do to grow your top line. We just talked briefly about retention. You asked about return on assets. I think about it as kind of realization. How much revenue do you realize per dollar of assets? How much revenue do you realize per account? Revenue do you realize per client relationship?
And let me pause you right there, David. How many firms would you say, or what percent would you say know what that number is, or know how much they are realizing on the published fee schedule, for example?
Well, that's a good question.
I know my answer from my experience working with clients, but I'm curious.
Right. I think most probably know their returns on assets, right? So they know kind of ballpark that they make maybe like 60 some basis points off of the AUM they manage, plus or minus 10, depending on the firm and characteristics of their book of business. I think they know that. I think there's probably a need, and we'll put it that way, so I'm not like casting aspersions, there's a need for a little bit more granularity about where the opportunities are in their book of business as it relates to realization. Because certainly there are some accounts, there's some relationships that are, at full fee, and there's quite a few that aren't. And so really understanding the proportions of those things, where are they, what are the patterns in their own book of business, I think there's probably a need for more precision.
Why don't I know that you've done a study recently, and I want to maybe share a slide because I think it's really valuable. If you could help us walk through.
Sure.
Some of your best practices for what you have identified from your pricing studies.
Sure. And let me just again say that before we go to the pricing practices, just want to make sure, because there's a lot here. There's a lot of work that's implied on this page. You can tell it's it's full of text. We stuffed it to the rafters with things that you could do. And so again, let me just try, for those that are listening in, strengthen the case for why. So I did mention we need to grow faster. Markets are coming down. We're losing some revenue. We could hire some salespeople. That's expensive. They're in high demand. And so retention, good idea. And then pricing and realization, I think also a good idea. At a very high level, why should you focus on this? Not just because it's cost effective, right? So it's cheaper to get a few extra bips on an account or relationship than it is to go hire a salesperson. It's cheaper to do a little bit better in terms of retention. So it's cost effective, but also it's controllable. So the things that we're about to share, the practices that Victoria has up on the screen, there are things that you can do that we firmly believe will improve your realization rates, will improve your pricing, and ultimately will improve your revenues. So maybe, Victoria, what I can do here is introduce the category areas And then kind of at your guidance, we can go a little bit deeper on any one of them.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Perfect. All right, so what you should see on the screen, or what I'm about to kind of share for those who's listening on the audio here, are 6 general areas that impact pricing and discounting, where we think there are opportunities. And these have kind of been all like vetted or sort of borne out with research we've done over the last 4 to 5 years. First category is to actively manage your prices. And so the little detail here, just to kind of get you thinking, is that a lot of times, people set and forget their fees, right? And so they might give a discount to Victoria, who's our new trust relationship. And, oh, by the way, this relationship is going to last for 15 to 20 years, perhaps. And no one ever goes back and revisits the terms of the price or revisits whether or not a discount that was applied at the outset is still warranted. And so there's kind of this set and forget mentality. Turn it on its head. First category of practice area is to actively manage your book of business.
Yeah, and you and I know that happens often.
Yeah, right. The second one, this is pretty straightforward. This should be known to everybody, is to maintain fee integrity. And so that's a very polite way of saying don't discount. We had to find kind of more euphemisms to make this palatable. But basically the point here, discounts are still widespread. I think everybody knows that. They definitely, again, this is borne out by research, they definitely impair your business economics. I think that's pretty straightforward. In addition, though, they create some brand and discrimination risks. And so just the category 2, straightforward, but it has to be said, is maintain fee integrity, otherwise known as don't discount. Mm-hmm. Category 3.
Well, can I pause there, David?
Yeah,
so
sure.
Let me ask, have you quantified, because we both know that the discounted fees is big, right? And I think a lot of firms don't really have a grasp on how big that can be in terms of if they were able to get some of those discounted fees closer to what the publisher standard fee schedule would be, there'd be a big revenue recoup there. Have you quantified what just ballpark that would be on average, or how big that could be for firms?
Right. So yeah, it's a good question. And so just to restate is, if we moved everything closer to the stated fee schedule, what would happen? Well, how about this? How about we reduce the kind of the goal, not the stated fee? It would be terrific if everybody listening got 100% of their stated fee. And we can all agree for various reasons it's never going to happen. How about if every account or relationship was just at the industry median? So for those of you that that do kind of manage relationships or manage accounts, imagine if all the ones that were kind of like languishing from a revenue perspective, if you just lifted them up to the median revenue per account or the median revenue per household for the industry. We think that would be about 10 basis points at least on assets for kind of a typical private bank. And so again, that's not going to your entire fee schedule. It's not 100%. That's just taking the stuff that's off target in terms of median revenues and trying to get them closer to that benchmark. And so again, hopefully what we're conveying here certainly depends on the book of business and the company, et cetera. However, though, the opportunity we feel is fairly large. Yeah.
Okay. And that's something we found too, is talking with clients. I think they're unaware of the size of that pool, if you will, or that opportunity for what could be realized by just trying to better understand their current fees that they're charging today, and if they moved it closer to the standard, what that additional revenue could be. But then also having the tools to understand and to look at the relationships, and then to be able to have those conversations with clients too. And so that's something that we found at Wealth Access, is being able to provide the view of the entire client relationships enables the wealth advisors to have those more detailed, personalized conversations to then be able to better understand what the relationship is today, and to also then have those conversations about where it could grow and where it could go from there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think those are good practices and good ideas.
Okay. Do you want to just touch on the remaining best practices here?
Sure. So a couple here, and then we can go deeper if you'd like. The third category, this is the most important, is to limit price discretion. And so again, for listeners who work within banks or other wealth managers, just kind of imagine like how many people get to weigh in on pricing decisions potentially. Could be a relationship manager, it could be a sales officer, it could be somebody who's like kind of the regional president, there could be a pricing committee. The point is there's all sorts of people who in any given business can weigh in on pricing outcomes. And so the assertion is that's bad, is you don't actually want a lot of people to have a lot of discretion and to have a lot of input in pricing. Because if they do, what you'll wind up with is a lot of variation in pricing and revenue outcomes. And so you want things that are a little bit more disciplined, a little bit more predictable, and again, less discretion. So the advice in category 3 here is to limit pricing discretion, codify things, take them out of the hands of human beings, put them into rules, kind of into the fabric, if you will, of the organization, and less subject to kind of the emotions or the whims or the habits of humans. So that's the third category.
All right. Makes sense. Standardize it.
Yes.
Yeah. Avoid variation. All right.
I'd love to do, if you're got appetite for at least one more, Victoria, I'd love to talk about the next one, which is to price with pride.
Yes.
All right.
Let's do it.
So typically at Wise, we do a lot of data and we do a lot of bar charts. And so, I'm always, this is kind of my preference. I like the idea of the rigor behind data and empirical research. Category 4 is really not about that. It is kind of a little bit of a pep talk. And it's ironic because what I like is the data, but this stuff is always really well received by people. It's the emotional aspect of pricing. It is that you guys who are listening provide a great service. You provide a premium service, and the pricing should reflect that. So our fourth big category area is to price with pride. Again, premium service that deserves premium pricing. Hopefully you can inculcate in your teams, in your sales officers and so forth, this idea that what you're bringing to market is a really good value proposition. I firmly believe that's true. If you think about what you're doing, you're helping people manage risks, you're helping people achieve retirement goals with their life legacy and so forth. And again, hopefully your pricing should reflect that. Now, in the notes here, there's some additional detail, but hopefully again, Victoria, that's the gist and it comes through clearly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think that's a good lesson. So let me ask, so at Wealth Access, so we're a data unification company providing basically that 360-degree customer view for the customer, but then also flipping it for the advisors and the bankers internally to also do more with the relationship there. How do you see a 360-degree customer view helping financial institutions to better realize revenue?
Wow, that's a big question. So a 360-degree view, I would go back to the I go back to our question about retention, actually. As you think about your own relationships, you can kind of segment or who are the real advocates in your book of business? What percentage of your clients would you describe that way? Which ones are sort of passively satisfied and which ones are perhaps a little bit less satisfied? And so I think, with a 360-degree view, the thing that kind of comes back to me is just really understanding the health of your own book of business, so that you can kind of, again, think about retention, think about expansion, think about referrals, all the things that we would like to do, especially from a revenue perspective. So many of them depend on really having a healthy kind of relationships with clients. And so that's kind of where I start, right back to the fundamentals, how engaged are your clients in that sense, because that triggers, so many good things that we would like to do.
Okay. That makes sense. And then to your point about referral, so something we're hearing from clients on the wealth side is that they're really looking at the small business segment as an internal pool of referrals. So the business owners, either they might not have a wealth relationship today, but they might get to have a wealth relationship, or they'll be prime or eligible for a wealth relationship once they sell their business and they inherit or they get that influx of assets. So we have found a lot of our wealth clients are now looking at that business segment as a built-in internal pool, and they're trying to get a better sense of providing a service and providing a unified view for those business owners to be able to have manage their business finances and their personal finances in one spot, to help retain them, going back to retention, to help grow that business relationship, to then stick with those business owners. So then when they get to that point of maybe selling their business, they already have that referral to then go to the wealth side of the business. Are you seeing anything similar like that with your clients, or have you heard anything about also trying to focus more on the business side for built-in referrals?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you ask people what their growth strategies are, so imagine just kind of picking up the phone and you say to somebody that runs a wealth management business, hey, it's tough out there. The market's not cooperating. What are you going to do to grow your top line? Things that they'll mention, number one, business owners will come up a lot from a lot of different firms. And so that's a huge market opportunity. And when you talk to people in this industry, you see or you find out that they're really trying to line up their own resources behind that opportunity, right? So how do they help their advisors get in front of deal flow? What sort of accreditations do they need? Do we need to come up with different interview guides and so forth for working with business owners? We just, for example, did a webinar on how firms are using financial planning as a tool to engage business owners, right? So what does the sort of post-liquidity event look like? So this is a really big avenue for sort of big opportunity, if you will, at least perceived for our community. There's a lot of stuff there. Again, I mentioned financial planning. The other thing that just kind of immediately comes to mind, Victoria, is that firms are, to varying degree, trying to get in as early as possible. Mm-hmm. And so that might mean for somebody who's kind of a relatively new business owner, relatively young, still a long way from retirement, still a long way from liquidity, to perhaps accept them as a wealth management client, depending on whether or not they seem like they're on a trajectory to become, to have liquidity at some point down the road. So again, the idea there is to get in early to accept people as clients, who might still be very much in the sort of accumulation and building phase, but in the hopes of having a relationship over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we've all been hearing about the transfer of wealth and the transfer of wealth for many years, and it's going to keep happening. So I think that's a great point about trying to establish that relationship with all customer segments, really, right? Young, even if they might not have that wealth now, because they're likely going to be some of the generations that are inheriting that wealth,
right?
And then might be a prime wealth target. So, okay. Makes sense. Well, this was a great conversation. I do have a few little quick questions for you, David.
Sure.
To put you on the spot here. All right. Your favorite sports team?
My favorite sports team is probably basketball. Let's see. I think for college, University of Virginia. So the Cavaliers, my alma mater. I think that has to be my answer.
Okay. Would you rather read the book or watch the movie?
Rather read the book.
Okay. I was gonna guess that for you. What's your drink of choice?
Drink of choice is probably beer.
Okay. Like an IPA or like a local brewery?
Yeah, like an IPA, I think would be sort of a go-to for alcoholic adult beverages. Now that I'm thinking about your question, however, if somebody said that I had to give up either beer or coffee, I'd probably give up beer and stick with coffee. Can't imagine life without it. But for alcohol after 5:30, definitely a beer IPA, good choice. Okay.
All right. And the last question is, what sport would you compete in if you were in the Olympics?
Here again, I'd probably go back to basketball. I know it's kind of a boring answer.
You got the height. You got the height advantage.
The height. It's funny, you guys. The pitch there always is that it's something that I love that doesn't actually love me back. So I did play basketball in high school. It was good for maybe 2 points, a couple rebounds, and 5 fouls. That was my profile. So never really that successful, fairly mediocre basketball player, but I still love it. So if I had to choose, that would be it.
Okay. Well, gold medal to you. All right. Well, David, very much appreciate your time today. Appreciate the conversation. And we'll look forward to just continuing to talk.
All right. Sounds good, Victoria. Thanks
All right.
so much.
Thank you all for joining us today. Bye.
Bye-bye.